everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to make petite vanilla scones inspired by the Pioneer Woman. You need some heavy cream, 3/4 of a cup. You need some vanilla beans, 3 whole ones. You need flour, sugar, powdered sugar, salt, baking powder, 2 sticks of unsalted butter cold, 1/4 cup of whole milk, an egg, a rolling pin, a sifter and bowl, and some measuring cups and measuring spoons. You'll need a fork and knife and a spoonula or rubber spatula. First, we're going to measure 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream, and we're going to split 2 of the vanilla beans and scoop out the caviar. I found this a little bit difficult with these beans, were a little dry. So I kind of just held them in my hand a little bit to warm them up, and that helped. And it's not really caviar, you know, it's just vanilla beans, if that's what they call it. I've seen the Pioneer Woman make these, and she actually was inspired by the Petite vanilla bean scones from Starbucks. But I just changed the recipe a tiny bit to suit my needs. So you're going to do this first because we want this to set aside and let the vanilla beans really incorporate into the half and half. The heavy cream. Okay? Once you've scooped out the guts, then you're going to go ahead and put the whole bean in there too. And just set it aside, like I said, for 15 minutes. Give it a stir. All right, and then we're going to add 3 cups of flour to the sifter. For some reason, I started with the 3rd measuring cup. So that was 1 cup, 2 cups, 3 cups. Come on. There we go. And we're going to sift this with the sugar. I guess it's 2/3 of a cup of sugar. One, 2, and the baking powder, 5 teaspoons of baking powder. 3, 4, 5, and the 1/4 teaspoon of salt. There you go. And we're just going to sift this together. If you have a traditional cup sifter, then you can go ahead and do it anyway. But this is just to show you how to use a sieve in this nature. You basically just tap, 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 tap. It is actually quite satisfying. But I've sped it up here. This whole process really only takes about 20 minutes for prep, and then about 20 minutes for cooling. Okay? Now we're going to cut in the cold butter. And I went ahead and I pre-cut it into cubes. I basically sliced pats and cut them long ways and then sideways. And I dropped them in. You want the butter to be super cold, like with any flaky pastry. You want the butter, basically it's going to float these little tiny butter solids all throughout the pastry, which is what makes it that flakiness. All right, and the other stick. And I'm just using my paring knife, but you guys can use whatever you want. All right, and the reason we use a fork and a knife is because I don't have a pastry cutter. And a lot of people don't have pastry cutters anyway, so I just wanted to show you how to do it without a pastry cutter, okay? So I'm just basically using a fork and knife, and you can use 2 knives, but it's just, I found it easier I always find it easier to do it with a fork and knife. And then just cut, cut, cut. And you want it to resemble coarse crumbs. Sip of coffee? Yeah, back at it. Okay. And what I noticed, and you guys will notice too, is, well, if your butter is yellow, as the mixture starts to get butter incorporated, the flour actually turns like yellowish. So you know it's incorporated. Well, you'll see patches of white flour. That means you still have to blend it. So what I have here is I don't have a pastry cutter, but this is actually like a spice cutter. It didn't really work so great, so we're not going to use that. But just to show you that there's other alternatives, and use your fingers if you need to. Just try to break up the butter, but not really soften it too much, okay? And you'll see here it's starting to come together. And just blend it with a fork. And Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the vanilla beans out of the cream and give the cream a little bit of a stir and mix in the 1 egg into the cream. All right, and use the fork to blend, beating up that egg. All right, and then we're going to slowly with the fork incorporate the cream egg mixture in with the flour. All right, and I am cheap and want to get every single last vanilla bean and drip of heavy cream out of this cup. So I'm using my rubber spatula for that. I think they're the best bowl scrapers. And then again, I just want to mix with the fork until it all just comes together. It's going to look like a really crumbly, it's going to be somewhat sticky dough, but you'll see it'll come together soon enough. And that's the great thing about scones, is they always look like, how is this going to become a pastry? But it does. But that's what gives it that great texture. Okay? All right. Now, just get it together in a big bowl the best we can. And now you want to turn it out on a floured surface. So add some flour to the board. This is a Paula Deen pie board that I got on clearance at Walmart. That's what I like to use to do my baking on at the table. And then you're just going to roll it out. It says 3/4 to a 1/2 inch to 3/4, but I don't know. I like it to be a little thicker because the scones aren't supposed to be that big, and they end up coming out pretty big. But what you do is you're going to make it in 12 squares and then cut each square on the diagonal. And then I use a board scraper to scoop them up and put them on the cookie sheet lined with parchment or a silicone mat. And you could make them pretty at this point if if you're doing them for show. You just can clean up the edges. There's always that one corner that doesn't quite make it. But they don't really come out as petite as the ones from Starbucks. They're a little bit bigger. But you could always just make them like smaller, just cut into maybe make 16 squares and then cut the squares in half. But this will make 2 dozen. And then my assistant puts them in the oven. And you want to put them in the oven for 18 minutes, turning halfway through and flipping top and bottom. And then you want to take them out just before they become golden brown. They just have slightly brown edges. You want to cool them on the pan for 15 minutes. And then transfer the cooling rack to the top of the cookie sheets over the Silpat, so we can glaze them. Yay! And then just let them set aside until you make your glaze. And for the glaze, we're going to take a 1/4 cup of milk, whole milk. I didn't have whole milk. I only have 2%, so I actually add some of the heavy cream to it. And then you want to split the third and final vanilla bean. And again, scoop out the caviar. I know it's a crazy name, right? Caviar. And then add it to the milk. And then again, like before, you throw the bean in there for a little bit. Set it aside. Okay, while you measure out your powdered sugar. Okay. And the recipe for the Pioneer Woman, she doubles it, and she entirely dunks the entire vanilla bean scone in the vanilla bean glaze. I just sometimes think that that's a little too sweet. So here I am just adding cream. So here is 2.5 cups of powdered sugar. So I just make half a recipe, and I'll show you here 3 different ways to basically glaze them, depending on how sweet you want your scones to be, because there's not a lot of sugar in them. So you're just going to slowly add the milk mixture and whisk. Add your pinch of salt. Now here is a full immersion dunk. That's what Pioneer Woman suggests, the whole front and back of the scone. But I just really like to do the tops. And then you just let them drain off in the bowl a little bit, and then set them on the cooling rack. So that's the first 2 techniques, and here in a second I'll show you the third. But I like my glaze nice and thick too. Actually, Mom and Jim like my glaze really thick too. So just set them, like I said, set them over the cooling rack, over the Silpat. It'd be so much easier to clean, I promise. and my assistant. My assistant tends to my needs. And I'll show you here what I decided to do was to drizzle some glaze on some. Since I'm not supposed to have a lot of sugar, and there isn't a lot of sugar in the actual scone, I just decided to take 4 or 5 of them and just drizzle glaze on them. So if you like your scones not as sweet as a fully glazed scone, you can go ahead and just drizzle some of the glaze on. If you like it medium sweetness, just go ahead and glaze the tops. But if you like it super sweet, you can go ahead and glaze the whole thing. I just will suggest that if you're going to glaze the whole thing, you double the glaze recipe, okay? Because that's what the original instructions were. And then just cool for an hour and enjoy. Once you cool them for, well, not cool them, but you set them aside for an hour in a cool room or cool area, and the glaze will harden, and then enjoy with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. They are absolutely delicious. So I hope you really enjoyed this recipe. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. Share with friends and family. And as always, take care. God bless. And we'll see you next time. Bye.